The Low Water Bridge is written by John Schlue and narrated by AI voice Kayla. Copyright 2020-2024 John Schlue. Petunia Louise Winnecker, alias Patooie Louie, et al., is her small town's and family's queen of nicknames, and a half-orphaned daughter whose dad was recently killed in a Mississippi River barge explosion. On a week-long trip to the lake with her brother Spud and Uncle Charlie, she and Spud must cope with trickster cousins, mysterious backwoods farmers, flesh-eating hogs, and a life-and-death situation, all while trying to come to terms over the loss of their father.
Our mother's voice boomed across the neighborhood and through the woods to our schoolyard atop the bluff, where it reached our ears commanding us home for dinner. I ran to the edge of the hill and yelled back down through the treetops, "Coming!" in an elongated, echoing yodel. "Why do you do that?" Spud asked. "Do what?" I said. "Answer her the first time when you know she'll call twice more before we have to go," he said, as he tossed the baseball up and hit it into the infield. Jack lunged to his right and snatched the grounder out of the air on one bounce with a backhanded grab for an easy out. "Double play," he called out. "No way," I protested. "Yes way, you had a man on first and a one-hop catch is a double play," Jack answered. He threw the ball to Buddy in the outfield, who gave two umpires fist pumps, signaling Jack was right. "See what you and Mom caused, Lou. If you hadn't distracted me with your long-distance conversation, I'd have gotten all that ball instead of just a piece, and we'd have two men on bases, instead of two outs." We were playing Indian ball, an elaborate form of fly-zand grounders, where two-person teams try to advance imaginary runners by hitting grounders past the infielder and flies over the infielders and the outfielders' heads for multiple bases. It was a game Spud and I were forced to adopt instead of team baseball after young families with kids started moving out of our old riverfront part of town into the suburbs. "Two out and you're up, Patooie Louie," Buddy called out, as he threw the ball back to me from the outfield. I gave him a disapproving frown and picked up the bat. As I bobbed the ball gently up and down in the palm of my hand, I studied Jack and Buddy's positions to decide where I would try to hit it. Both had moved in signaling that they thought me incapable of hitting a hot grounder or line drive past Jack, or a fly ball between them or over Buddy's head. I spit a stream of saliva between the gap in my two front teeth. I don't know which is worse, being named for my great-aunt, Petunia Louise, or having these two bozos combine my name and ability to outspit them into a nickname I hate, I said to Spud. "Just get a runner on and stop complaining," he said. "Two outs and no one on base," I announced as I lobbed the ball into the air and swung. I heard the bat crack and watched my line drive shoot past Jack's outstretched hand and into Buddy's waiting glove. "Out 3, Buddy crowed. A bucket of fried chicken and side dishes in plastic containers were waiting on the kitchen table when we stormed through the back door arguing about the Indian ball game. A year ago, before the accident, there would have been fried chicken sizzling in a skillet on the stove and pots of mashed potatoes, green beans and corn on the cob waiting to be devoured. But with Mom now working full-time, grocery store bucket chicken was just easier. Speaking of mashed potatoes, it is Spud's favorite food. He was born Henry Tobias Winnecker, but a childhood food allergy caused him to have puking fits until he was 4 years old, and the only solid food he could be counted on holding down was Mom's mashed potatoes. In fact, one of the first words he learned to say was Spud's, so it was only natural that the name stuck to him and still follows him around. "Did you kids wash up?" Mom asked as she walked into the kitchen. "Yup," Spud lied. "Say Mom, I think this deli chicken is delicious, but do you think we could have your home-cooked kind some weekend if you're not too tired?" Spud asked. Mom smiled a sad smile and nodded yes, then busied herself at the kitchen sink with her back to us. "What are you thinking?" I silently mouthed to Spud. "Sorry," he mouthed back as he rolled his eyes and made a scrambled brain sign with his fingers. Mom wiped her nose and dabbed at the corners of her eyes with a tissue, then turned and came to the table. "You're right, it's been too long since we had home cooking. I'll pick up the fixings for this weekend." Yes, Spud said as he jumped up and hugged her. After dinner, Spud and I played catch in the backyard until it started to turn dark. We were sitting on the back porch swing when Mom came outside carrying a blanket. "Want to watch the stars?" she asked. We spread the blanket out and Mom laid down in the center so we would each have a side of her to ourselves. The moon had not yet risen, and the night sky was ablaze with white, silver, and golden stars. "There's the Big Dipper," I said. "And to its left is the summer triangle," Altair, Deneb, and Vega, Spud added. For a while we laid there without speaking, each in our thoughts, studying the billions of stars, planets, and unknown bodies that make up the Milky Way. "Do you think our daddy is one of those specks of gold dust?" I asked. "Are you asking if he is in heaven?" Mom said. "Maybe. You know our souls aren't physical things, right?" "I guess, but where do they go to be with God after we die?" I said. "Well, some people believe God is in them and with them while they are alive, so when they die their soul doesn't go anywhere to join God, it remains with him in the universe for eternity. Some don't believe we have souls at all and when we are gone that's it, there is no afterlife. Others believe our souls are recycled and come back to inhabit the same or a different living earthly form of being and are reincarnated." "You mean like a cat or a dog?" I asked. "Or an aardvark or earthworm," Mom joked, and we all started laughing at the idea of us returning someday as a family of aardvarks. "Does thinking your dad is a speck of stardust help you remember him and keep him in your heart?" Mom said. "That's what I'm trying to figure out," I answered seriously. It had been almost a year since our dad was killed in a barge explosion and fire on the Mississippi River. It was a hot, muggy day. A thunderstorm was moving in and the tow of barges our dad was working on was unloading liquid propane to an onshore storage facility. 2 barges away, Dad was busy welding a hatch cover on a grain barge. That's when the explosion happened. The NTSB and the Coast Guard were unsure what caused the explosion and fire that killed 6, including our dad, but they suspected it was sparked from Dad's welding arc or a lightning strike that struck the propane barge. We don't talk much about the accident, but we all miss him a lot. And we sometimes wonder if things will ever get back to normal. Your Uncle Charlie called today. He and Uncle Billy are spending next week at the lake and asked if you two want to come along, Mom said. Yes, tell them we'll come, Spud answered. Are Leroy and Thad going to be there? I asked. I assume so, Mom said. Then I don't want to go. Come on, Lou, we haven't been since we lost Daddy. It'll be fun, we can fish, hike, and take the John boat out on the lake, Spud pleaded. Are you going, Mom? Not this time. I have to work and could use some alone time to straighten up the house. Maybe I will come down to get you at the end of the week and spend a night. Spud was excited to go to the lake, maybe he was just excited to be going anywhere. The truth is we had only been to the lake a few times with our dad and those were the last couple of years he was alive. On the trip to the cabin, Spud and I talked quietly in the backseat of Uncle Charlie's Jeep about not letting ourselves be tricked by our cousins during this vacation. Uncle Billy's sons, Leroy and Thad, were 14 and 15 years old. In our past trips to the lake, they treated Spud and me like we were their pledges in a fraternity farmhouse of horror. Using tricks, pranks, and lies, they harassed us without mercy from the moment we got there until we left. Leroy, who is a year older than Spud, is an evil genius, and while Thad is equally troubled, at least we aren't afraid of being maimed or killed by one of his pranks. Like the time Leroy convinced us that hornets sleep at night and therefore it was safe and would be fun to relocate their nest while they slept, and then watch them fly around in confusion in the morning as they tried to get reoriented to their new surroundings. You and Louie take the flashlight and these crab apples and chuck a few at the nest to make sure they are sleeping, while Thad and I get a ladder, Leroy told Spud. It seems like almost all their pranks involve us doing something in the dark, where no witnesses can see the crime and punishment being doled out to us and we cannot see things like angry hornets swarming to attack us. Of course, when Uncle Billy heard about his son's latest crime, he chalked it up to mischief. What will those two jokers come up with next, he said. We wondered the same thing. A low water bridge spans the mouth of a large lily pad cove on the east side of the 13-mile-long reservoir where our cabin is located. The bridge is an open-sided single-lane flat slab of concrete resting in the shallow bed of the cove. Underwater culvert pipes allow water and aquatic life to flow through the bisected cove between the open water of the lake and the creek that feeds into it from the bayou on the east side. It connects land on the north end of the lake to the south via a county-maintained dirt and gravel road. When the water level of the lake is low to normal, the road is passable to motorized vehicles and small to medium-sized farm implements. However, it is impassable after heavy rains and when the reservoir's water level is over capacity, then the bridge is underwater. On this trip, the bridge water was low. Uncle Charlie aimed his Willis Jeep station wagon at the gravel road on the north side of the cove and drove slowly onto the bridge. "Watch your sides and tell me if I'm getting too close to the edge," he said as we crossed the bridge. Daddy and Uncle Charlie's cabin is 100 yards from the lake's shoreline in a grove of trees at the end of one of our Uncle Billy's cornfields. At a distance, it looks bigger than its 300 square feet. It started as a one-room square building with front and back doors and 2 windows. There is a propane heater, stove, and refrigerator inside, but no other modern conveniences. An outhouse is in some bushes behind the cabin. Through the years, shed-like porches were extended from the eaves. One side is the kitchen and the other is a sleeping bay with bunk beds. When our families aren't around, glass storm doors and windows protect the porches. But when we are there, the sashes are raised to let fresh air in, and breezes pass through, something that during the hot and humid summer months is mandatory to keep mosquitoes out and make sleeping bearable. After we unloaded the Jeep, picked our bunks, and unrolled our sleeping bags, Uncle Charlie sat us down to remind us about the lake rules for the week. "We try to keep things simple while we are down here. You both know how to swim, right?" We nodded yes. "Good, but no swimming without an adult with you. No boating without a life jacket. No wading around in the water unless you are wearing hip boots or know what is under it. Basically, practice water safety the whole time you're here. So long as you do these things, you pretty much have free rein to go hiking or fishing anywhere. Just let me know where you're headed and when you expect to be back. Otherwise, have fun and try to stay out of trouble." The next morning, Spud and I walked to the low water bridge to fish. Spud had his fly rod and a pocket full of flies, and I was carrying a landing net. From the far end of the bridge, Spud parachuted a fly into the lily pad-ringed water and took in the fly line slack with his free hand. It floated for a few seconds, its rubber band tail and wing feelers trembling on the smooth surface. He lightly snapped the line, agitating the feelers and forcing the popping bug's nose down and through the water. It emitted a soft pop, like the sound of a cork being pulled from a bottle. One more tug and pop, then he drew the bug airborne with a quick lifting motion of the rod. The fly line lashed back behind him, then unlooped forward from the gentle push of his hand and arm to a new open spot amid the lily pads. This time the bug was struck immediately, and with such force, I was convinced the fish saw its prey coming in like a kamikaze and rose to detonate it with its jaws before it crashed. Spud had neither the chance nor the need to set the hook. The force of the fish diving down deep with the fly in its mouth did the job for him. At first, the line went still, like maybe the fish had spit the hook out. Then the action began. The line ripped through the open water from one side of the cove to the other in an arcing path, the reels drag screeching as it gave up its attempt to modulate the rod's torque and the amount of line being stripped off. Spud followed the fish across the bridge, all the while reeling line in and trying to keep even tension on the fly rod. Again, the line stopped, but this time the water around it seemed to be churning. Spud caught up and pulled back hard on the rod, thinking it would set the hook deeper into the fish's mouth. But as he dipped the tip of the rod to slacken the line and gauge his action, the fish rolled and flashed its white belly as it grazed the surface and turned sharply down and into the lily pads, snapping the leader line and taking the popping bug as its trophy. Spud's fly rod stood limply erect. For a moment we stared in silence, stunned by the fish's sheer power and cunning. Then we heard their laughter. "Looks like you losers, lose again," Thad yelled. He and Leroy had watched the whole catch and escape from the bank at the far end of the low water bridge. "Yeah, how'd you learn to fly fish? Did your mom teach you, or did you get this bad on your own? Everybody knows you gotta play a big fish like that one instead of trying to drag it out of the water. Gotta let it wear itself out first," Leroy joined in. I felt my fist tighten and my face feel flush. Hey, Leroy, don't you ever say bad things about our mom again. Do you hear me? I shouted. Okay, all right, no disrespect meant. Come on, we've got something we want to show you, Thad said. What, another hornet's nest? Spud asked. Why not come and see? Leroy said. Spud looked at me and nodded his head in the direction of the cabin, as if to say, let's go back. But I thought it was awfully early to hang out with Uncle Charlie and maybe be given a lot of chores to do, so I shrugged my shoulders indifferently. This better not be another trick, Spud said. Nah, it's no trick, come on, said Thad. We skeptically followed them down the dirt road to a path that led to the reservoir. 2 hogs crossed the path in front of us as we wound our way through the woods to the edge of the lake. Offshore, in the lily pad shallows, a blue heron was waiting and dunking its sharp beak into the water, spearing for food. Pretty spectacular, huh? Thad said. We think he has a mate and a nest nearby, but we haven't found it yet. What are you gonna do when you find it? Steal their eggs? I said sarcastically. Of course not, what kind of guys do you think we are? Leroy said. Spud and I already knew the answer to that, but we kept quiet and rolled our eyes at one another. Back on the road, we decided to start for the cabin. On the way, I calmed down from being angry about Mom, and we all started laughing about how the fish had outsmarted us. When we crested a small rise on the county road, we saw a man picking corn in a small field nestled up against the woods. He was cutting ears off the stalks and throwing them into the open bed of a wagon drawn by a team of mules. 3 hogs were rooting up the ground around him, foraging for food. He shoved an ear of corn and tossed it to them as he watched us pass by. Who's that? I asked. Don't you remember him? That's old Vern Rottenberry. He and his brother Hi own most of the land around here. That old place on the hill down at the curve is where they live. Some say they've never been farther from home than Cape Girardeau. Others swear they know for certain of missing person cases where kids have suspiciously disappeared after the Rottenberry brothers caught them trespassing on their land. You see them hogs he's tossing corn to, they'll eat about anything, including body parts, Thad said. I felt a shiver run through my body and wondered if Spud knew about this and just forgot to tell me for some reason. But when I looked at him for an answer, he seemed as surprised as I. Then he gave me a don't believe this crap frown and head shake. Just how many missing kids are we talking about? I asked. Thad lazily fed a piece of juicy fruit gum into his mouth and studied me for a few seconds before answering. A lot over the past 50 years, I imagine. Why don't you look it up? He said. Is that what you did, or did you just make the whole thing up? Spud asked. Thad slowly chewed his gum and shifted his eyes to Spud. They also say the real reason all those kids disappeared was because they discovered the Rottenberrys had a secret still, and if the federal authorities found out about their moonshining operation they would put the old boys in prison for the rest of their natural-born lives, he said without blinking an eye. Natural-born lives? Whoever they are, really said, natural-born lives? Zombie-born lives sound more like it, I said with a nervous little laugh. At first, Spud made me feel comfortable with his doubtful look that signaled this yarn Thad was spinning was pure horror story fiction. However, the more Thad revealed about the Rottenberry brothers, the more realistic his story sounded.